Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, May 30th, 2025, and our friends, Ambassador Chas Freeman and Colonel Wilkerson, are back with us. Welcome back.
Glad to be with you.
Good to be with you, Nima.
I'm going to start with a broad question on the foreign policy of the United States. And the title of this video, by the way, is Why America's Missing Grand Strategy Could Be a Global Disaster. I'm going to start with you, Ambassador Chas Freeman. Your take on that.
Well, I don't think there is a grand strategy. In fact, there don't seem to be any strategies at all. I would define a strategy as a clear objective to which you devote appropriate resources to make its achievement feasible, and you try to do that in the most economical or ergonomic way. That is, it's the most efficient way to achieve objectives or reach a goal. But in this case, every negotiation we have, whether it's with Russians and Ukrainians, or whether it's with Hamas and the Israelis, or whether it's with Iran, we're moving the goalposts all over the field as we talk. So Mr. Witkoff, the president's all-purpose amateur envoy, he goes to these meetings, he listens, he learns, he hears things that he thinks are reasonable. He indicates an agreement with them, then he goes back to Washington, and the whole thing is renegotiated by the various factions in the government. And the final point I'd make, because I think Larry Wilkerson will have a good deal to say on this, is that the national security apparatus, which at one point had an intricate, often really Byzantine method of coordinating interagency activity, coordinating the formulation of policy and monitoring the implementation of it, and occasionally reaching out in a conspiratorial manner to some part of the bureaucracy to do something, often unwise. I'm thinking of Iran-Contra in the Reagan administration, sometimes wise, like the opening to China in the Nixon administration, which bypassed all the regular channels and reached out directly to experts one by one in the government. So neither of these functions are being performed. There is no interagency process worth the name. There is no constancy in policy. There is no strategy in the sense I defined it. And if there are conspiracies, they're accidental and unreported. So this is a pretty chaotic situation. And the chaos, I think, does threaten global stability. It threatens regional stability in a number of cases. And it certainly is frustrating the president, who seems to want peace, but clearly doesn't know quite how to get it.
Oh, Larry.
I don't disagree with the ambassador. I taught this. You're supposed to have an interagency working group. That's supposed to send its information up to the deputies committee. That's supposed to send its information up to the principals committee. And that's supposed to send its information up to the statutory National Security Council, at which the president sits. And in this process, you filter out all the problems and hopefully shape courses of action for the president. They're not doing that. As far as I can tell, they're not doing anything even remotely resembling that. And let me give you an answer that is an answer by contrast. I just listened to a brilliant speech in English, in very competent English, by Sergei Lavrov at Perm, Russia, where he was speaking to a host of people, but I wrote them down. The Perm Territory Governor, Dmitry Makonin, a delegation of the Permanent Committee of the International Conference of Asian Political Parties, the United Russian Party General Council Commission on International Cooperation, Inter alia. And his speech was a tour de force. His speech said essentially, and this is really a stunning thing for me to hear him say this, I think categorically they're through with us. They are through with us. They see us as duplicitous, conniving, lying, cheating, stealing, pick your adjective. And they have now decided, Moscow has now decided to join the inexorable flow of power, as I've talked about before, away from the West and toward the East, with China as the principal magnet, but now Russia and probably ultimately India, and certainly others joining in. And he described how Washington's antagonisms, as convoluted and uncoordinated as they are a pain in their ass because they're trying to do this, not for war purposes or some other kind of nefarious opposition to it, but because we're screwing their attempt to codify this kind of existence. I call it the ASEAN existence. It has no security component. It simply has financial, economic, trade, and other components. And everybody sort of tries to get along. And security provides for itself because no one's really interested in building up huge armaments in order to challenge someone else. I call that the new world, the multinodal world, as Ambassador Freeman has called it before. And we stand in the way. And he talked explicitly about how we're trying to generate a NATO presence, stand in the way. And he talked about Finland and Norway and Sweden and other countries being dupes, which I think categorically they are. So that's where we are. And we are inane in terms of dealing with that, whether we want to oppose it in a strategic way or whether we wanted to join it in a strategic way, or some combination of both. We're inane. We can't do it.
Nima, may I add something to that? Because I think what's emerged is a very interesting and self-defeating approach to negotiation in general. I will start with Iran as an example. Basically, what we are asking is, apparently, since whatever Mr. Witkoff said that was agreeable to Foreign Minister Arakchi in Muscat or in Rome was immediately repudiated under Israeli pressure when he returned to Washington. And we're essentially asking Iran to give up its entire nuclear program, peaceful or otherwise. We are asking it to disarm its missile force. We're asking it to sever its relations with the resistance to the genocide and ethnic cleansing in Palestine, as well as Lebanon and Syria. In other words, this is a negotiation that is supposed to be about nuclear issues. It's actually about subjugating Iran. It's actually about imposing the hegemony that Israel has achieved in the Levant on Iran. And I would add that I started with Iran, but I see the same pattern in the trade negotiations. Supposedly, they're about tariffs, sanctions, and the like, and adjusting economic relationships. They're not. They're about subjugating, subordinating the other party. So this is something that the Japanese essentially discovered when they sent their first of the two delegations they've sent now to Washington, that basically Washington wants them to kiss Mr. Trump something or other and extol his virtues and anoint him as the emperor of the world, and the United States as the eternal hegemon. And Japan, of course, quite flexible on many things, but even for them, this is a step too far. When we see South Africa, the slapdown diplomacy in the Oval Office of Cyril Ramaphosa, a very dignified, very intelligent man, even if perhaps not the best leader South Africa could have at this time, we see the same thing. Submit. It's a power play. It's not a negotiation about trade or, in the case of Cyril Ramaphosa, human rights. It is about recognizing that we're the supreme arbiter of your fate and bowing to us. And this is particularly ironic, of course, because as both Larry and I have pointed out, we're in an era in which the power of the United States relative to others is declining. And at this very moment, we are more imperious than ever in our approach to international relations. The two don't match. And so I will end there, but I think we have lost the art of diplomacy. which is persuading people, sometimes using coercion, but more often listening to them, trying to figure out what they want that we might also want, and building a bridge to them, and persuading them that the way we see things is the way they ought to see things, and that the interests we are advocating or defending are interests that are not just compatible with theirs, but favorable to their advantage. And we don't do that anymore. We do slapdowns in the Oval Office. We do surrender or else. We'll bomb you. We do. We'll tell you what the tariff rate is, and you have nothing to say about it, which is apparently coming up pretty soon for everybody. None of this is consistent with the global order, with the Westphalian arrangement of equal sovereignty among nations, with respecting other countries, and all of this is happening in a context in which the United States is setting a very bad example for the world in many, many areas. The rule of law is obviously seriously jeopardized, if not forfeited. The behavior of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Inspection people to immigrants and visitors from abroad has appalled much of the world. We are attacking our seed corn, our research universities, destroying our research and development programs, which caused us to lead in science and technology for a century and a half. And all of this is coming together, and the United States is not leaving its position of global primacy in a graceful manner. It's leaving it in a destructive manner, accompanied by a lot of self-sabotage at home, in my view.
And Nima, if I could just add to that, I think one of the things that is hastening the diminishment of the empire, if you will, is our support for Gaza.
Of course.
It's just incredible. I mean, you wouldn't believe the emails I get from people all across the country about how can we be this way? How can we do this? How can we condone babies dying in front of our faces and nothing being done about it? And when all we would have to do is step in and say a word. And then the other thing I would add to what Ambassador Freeman just said is I detect an extraordinary lack of empathy and imagination with regard to this leadership in particular, but the leadership for some time now. And besides experience, which the ambassador exemplifies par excellence, empathy and imagination are two very important ingredients of diplomacy, and we have none.
I know, Inema, you want to ask a question, but before you do, let me make one other point, which really horrified me. We have our president expressing horror and great anger that people are being killed in Ukraine.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he says nothing about people being killed in Gaza or in the West Bank. And in fact, we arm and fund the genocide and the ethnic cleansing there. So if you wanted a demonstration of a double standard that disqualifies the United States from any sort of moral leadership internationally, there you have it.
Bingo.
Here is an example. Congressman Thomas Massey, Republican congressman, he said that nothing can justify the number of civilian casualties inflicted by Israel in Gaza in the last 2 years. We are hearing this voice from the Republican Party. Most of the people who voted for Donald Trump, they wanted some sort of change. Larry, do you think that change is happening under the Trump administration, or at least some of what they have been asking for?
Let me grab back into my Shakespeare bag and say, a Moses come to judgment, a Moses come to judgment, Tom Massey, or a Solomon, whatever you want. A lone voice, though. The lone voice, he's precisely correct. Absolutely correct. But he's
He also believes in the Constitution,
yeah,
which is an unusual thing these days.
Yes. Massey's a strange guy. Remember that meeting we had with him at Best?
You.
but I like what he says most of the time.
But he will, I think this is a real problem. Tom Massey is admirable in what he says and what he believes, there's no doubt. He is a loner. He's very isolated in the Republican Party. The president has promised to try to get him defeated in the next election, make a special effort to do that. So he is indeed very much a loner. But I have to say, he talks the talk. Where's the walk? Where are the bills in Congress? Where are the hearings? Where is the action on the floor to back up the very pertinent statements he makes? So one can only give him credit for so much. At least he's saying the right thing.
But in his defense, I would say that I worked with one congressman for a long time, and the Republicans, he was a Republican. He was the one who coined the phrase "freedom fries" during the war. Walt Jones, and they just isolated him. They wouldn't let him have subcommittee chairmanships or committee chairmanships, and they just smashed him. The only person who would even have breakfast with him was Ron Paul. I mean, they just put the whole Republican leadership machine down on his back, so he couldn't.
Well, Ron Paul is a good example of someone who was treated the same way.
Yeah,
but who nonetheless managed to exercise a fair amount of influence by working backstage.
True, and he had his followers like Walt.
Yes.
Ambassador, here is what Donald Trump said in terms of negotiations with Iran in the way that he tries to deal with Netanyahu and what Netanyahu is trying to do.
Back at Iran, did you warn Prime Minister Netanyahu against taking some sort of actions that could disrupt the talks there in a phone call last week?
Well, I'd like to be honest. Yes, I did. Next question, please.
Mr. President, just last on sanctions.
I did, yeah.
If Senate Republicans want to push
It's not a warning. I said I don't think it's appropriate.
What exactly did you tell him? Did you
I just said I don't think it's appropriate. We're having very good discussions with him, and I said I don't think it's appropriate right now. Because if we can settle it with a very strong document, very strong, with inspections and no trust. I don't trust anybody. So no trust. I want it very strong where we can go in with inspectors, we can take whatever we want, we can blow up whatever we want, but nobody getting killed. We can blow up a lab, but nobody's going to be in the lab, as opposed to everybody being in the lab and blowing it up, right? Two ways of doing it. Yeah, I told him this would be inappropriate to do right now because we're very close to a solution. Now, that could change at any moment, could change with a phone call. But right now, I think they want to make a deal, and if we can make a deal, save a lot of lives.
Ambassador, are you optimistic about what he's talking about?
Not particularly. I'm sure he does not want Mr. Netanyahu to launch an attack on Iran at this time, as he said. He wants to hold out the threat of that as pressure on Iran. I think, there are limits in a negotiation to what you can do with brute threats. You have to have, even if you're trying to deter something, you have to offer some reassurance that good behavior will be rewarded, that there's something in it for the other side. I didn't hear him announce anything that would please Iran. There was nothing in there about removing sanctions. There was something about the US military or somebody other than the UN going in and blowing up labs, which is quite an intrusion on another country's sovereignty. And I doubt that was well received in Tehran as a thought. On the one hand, he wants a peace with Iran. He probably would like to open the Iranian market to American investors and so forth. Make Iran once again a full member of the family of nations. But on the other hand, the way he's going about this is largely with military threats. And I think, we can't get over the fact that every time there's a meeting with the Iranians, something happens And then it's basically undone back in Washington, where you have a fight between America firsters and Israel firsters, and the Israel firsters are clearly in the ascendancy. Mr. Trump listens to all of them, and seems the last one who talks to him gets to call the tune. So I think I would make one other comment here, and that is, I'm told that President Trump on Wednesdays sees somebody from the intelligence community, Tulsi Gabbard, I assume, for a briefing. He doesn't read the daily presidential brief. He leaves that duty to Vice President Vance, who does read it and apparently asks intelligent questions and takes the material into board. And Mr. Trump is getting his information not from the government that he heads, but from Fox News and other sources which have a viewpoint, and of course from the Israel lobby, or the Zionist lobby, if you will, in the case of Iran. So I don't think these negotiations can succeed if every time something's achieved, the goalposts are moved and the goal is canceled, and that seems to be what's going on.
Larry, Donald Trump, at the same time, Axios reported that the Persian Gulf states, Arab states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE, they have talked with Donald Trump in his visit to the region. They asked him not to escalate the situation with Iran, because they know if something happens, they're going to be involved in that sort of conflict. They cannot be out of the conflict. How do you see the balance of forces on Donald Trump himself, from Netanyahu, Israeli lobby, even within his administration, and the pressure coming from Arab states? Because we have to see what would be the sum of these vectors coming to Donald Trump.
Well, let me say a lingering word on that video you just showed. Imagine you're Foreign Minister Arachi, and you're hearing the President of the United States say that you're going to blow up the labs. Now, you're a scientist and other people can be in them, or they can be out of them. I don't think, other than the dimension of human life loss, there's a lot of difference in terms of Iran's nuclear program. So what a preposterous thing to say. It just makes no sense whatsoever. And if Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed and others are listening to this, they must be just as concerned as people in Iran. Because as you just pointed out, if it comes down to war, whether it's Netanyahu leading us into it, and I understand the strike packages are together and ready to go, the F-15s, F-35s, their rubber tires are being warmed up even as I speak. If that's the case, they're going to suffer too, as you just pointed out. So I don't understand this way of the president in conducting what I'll grace with the word of diplomacy, negotiations or whatever. I shouldn't. I just don't understand it. It's, as you just pointed out, it's making our friends, our allies, our compatriots, if you will, in that area of the world, heinous though some of them are, in my view, it's making them uneasy, and it's clearly making Iran uneasy and less apt to be susceptible to decent diplomacy should we try to effect it. I don't understand it. I simply do not understand this man. And I think, who said it? The ambassador, you said it, or someone in the tape said it. He's not listening to the presidential brief. He's not listening to the intelligence briefs. Vance is doing that. Then my question becomes, how much time does Vance have, and how much impact does Vance have to give the gist of it to the president? Or does the president even want the gist of it? Does he even want anything of it? Or does he just want to keep operating from his own Fox News sheet of music? I can't answer it.
Let me add a couple of points which are relevant and follow on Larry's points. If you talk to the Chinese, as I do from time to time, you will find that they consider alliances liabilities, because the allies that you make a commitment to, if you're a powerful country, as they are, as we are, it can get you in trouble. They can do something that triggers a war you don't want to be in, but you have no choice because your credibility is invoked. And we've seen this again and again in our own case. The odd thing now is that the people we propose to protect think that we're creating liabilities by our behavior. We could get them, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, etc., into a war they have absolutely no desire to be in, and in fact, very much want to avoid. And I'll just close with a note of irony. Here we have the United States jumping up and down hysterically about a possible Iranian nuclear weapon. 6 nuclear bombs could be made apparently within a few days. They're at that stage of nuclear latency. There is reason to be concerned, but not a word about Israel, which has a large arsenal of nuclear weapons and a record of behaving recklessly and in total disregard of international law and human decency. In fact, to look at Gaza in a completely evil manner, which has drawn, if you want to be hated, the best way to achieve it is to do something really hateful. And they've done that. So we're not concerned about that, apparently, because there's a taboo. You can't talk about the Israeli nuclear program. If you do, you're in violation of some kind of, I don't know what, suffocating policy decision that was made way back when, not to recognize reality, which everyone does. You just won't talk about it. So everybody should be talking about a nuclear-free West Asia. You get rid of the Iranian bomb, you should get rid of the other bombs too. But no, we're not talking about that. So again, we have a policy that is not terribly credible. In fact, invites derision from other quarters. And, I think it's very important that Iran not be pushed into developing nuclear weapons, if only because if they do, so will the Saudis, the Turks, the Egyptians, and others. And they may not prove to be quite as restrained as the Indians and Pakistanis just did. So I think there is a great deal at stake here, but it's trivialized when you refuse to talk about the elephant in the room, or in this case, the nuclear weapons of Israel in the room.
Let me just add, Nima, that the 2 countries that I fear most with regard to a second use of a nuclear weapon against human beings are Israel and the United States.
Fair enough.
Colonel, we know that somehow the European countries are missing from the picture in the Middle East. We don't see that much of action on their part to put pressure on Israel. And they have announced that they want to put pressure on Israel. The United Kingdom was one of those countries. And the other day, the trade envoy of the United Kingdom was in Israel, just contradicting what they were talking about before. And here is what Reuters reported. I was so fascinated with the move on their part. Here is Reuters is reporting that the United Kingdom, France, and Germany are pressuring the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, to declare Iran in breach of its non-proliferation obligations at the next IAEA quarterly meeting. What is happening with them? Is that the proxy war, as the conservative leader Kemi Badenoch on Sky News, she said that what's going on in Ukraine and in Gaza is a proxy war on the part of the United Kingdom?
Let me answer that in 2 parts. One, when I heard the statements coming out of Germany and out of England, out of France, and to a certain extent out of Canada, my initial thought to myself was, yeah, show me the proof, And then what you said, this special trade or free trade agreement, whatever it was that was being negotiated by Britain, renegotiated by Britain with Israel, seems to have gone right along as though it were nothing had ever happened, nor nothing had ever been said in the parliament. So they're deceitful. No one needs to say that about perfidious Albion, but they are. and the rest I assume are too. I take the German foreign minister's words seriously right now, and I'm waiting to see some proof that Merz and his foreign minister are going to do something different. And that would be quite dramatic, because Germany has been, of all the countries in Europe, probably least apt to do anything anti-Israel, if you will. And then the second part of your question, what was, I lost it. What was the
second part was the way that they're moving against Iran, and
right?
Is that a
I think this is part of the getting ready, if you will, for the snapback portion of the sanctions that they're going to have to deal with if we belabor this, and it's going to be belabored, it looks like, unless Netanyahu ends the belaboring with a war. And this negotiation period goes beyond the snapback period for both the EU and the UN sanctions. So they're trying to position themselves for doing that, and maybe they're going to use that as some pressure to expedite the negotiations. I don't know. But I do know this is a crucial period around August or so when these things start to happen, and somebody's got to make a decision as to how they happen.
The effort to get the IAEA to declare Iran in breach of its obligations also serves an Israeli policy that they've been very explicit about, that would provide a pretext for an attack. Now, I would say, Larry, it's very hard to be more cynical than I am about this stuff, but you might have achieved that. I would just describe the Europeans as doing what they usually do, which is sitting on their hands while wringing them. And it's a hard posture to adopt, but they've learned how on many occasions. This, I agree with you. My reaction to this was, okay, you talk the talk, where's the walk? I don't see it coming. There is a point to be made here too, and that is, once again, this is all with indifference to the provisions of international law. Iran is a signatory of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It has a right under international law to reprocess uranium. It has offered to go back apparently to 3.67% enrichment. It has already subjected itself to inspection. Inspections are still going on. It has been prepared to adopt more strenuous, strict inspection, apparently. And 3.67% is adequate for a nuclear reactor to produce power, or a nuclear reactor to produce medical radiation-related materials. It's not adequate to produce a weapon. So what's on the table is consistent with international law. It is not unreasonable, I think. Apparently, Mr. Witkoff at one point thought it wasn't unreasonable. After all, it was Mr. Trump who tore up the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement that was made in the Obama administration. Yeah, he did that in his first administration. And so we have ironies here. The man who destroyed the nuclear accord is now trying to produce something that would perform the same functions it did, probably with much of the same language. The man who is arming Ukraine, who armed Ukraine in his first term and who has not stopped arming Ukraine, is claiming to be a neutral mediator between Ukraine and Russia. It's not, this stuff just won't wash. You can't do that. Same thing in the case of Israel-Hamas. The American position is wholly aligned with Israel. We now have this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is a farce, and which is proving exactly as incompetent and ineffectual as the UN and 200 NGOs condemned it for being. 4 feeding stations for 2 million people, intended basically to reinforce Israeli intelligence surveillance of that population. It's bait, not a meal that they're laying out. They want people to come to these feeding stations so they can look them over, and if they don't like them, they'll take them away. So all of this is, at a minimum, incompetent. if you're less kind than that, you might come up with another word indicating that it was criminal.
Just to round out the cynicism here, Nima, let me say that I think Donald Trump thinks other world leaders are as stupid as he is.
Colonel, I always was fascinated with the way that European countries are destroying themselves in the process of the conflict in Ukraine. And right now, when something happened in the Middle East, at least Donald Trump is trying to do something with Iran. We can see that. And they're going in that direction. Do you see any positive role on their part that they're playing? I don't see. When it comes to China, it's the same way. You look at the European Union, the way that they're talking about China, talking about Russia, talking about the Middle East, Iran. It's the same way. They don't seek any sort of peace.
Well, if you listen to Lavrov, you heard him saying precisely that thing, that we were weaponizing NATO for an attack against Russia and an attack against China ultimately, and even went so far as to say for a NATO East, if you will, so that we would have Japan, South Korea in an alliance that mimicked NATO and indeed was operating with NATO in Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia. That's the way I took it. And if they're looking at it that way, that's the way they take it. I think what you're asking, though, is, are the current crop of European leaders so bad that they believe that what they're doing is healthy for their countries? And the answer is yes. And Merz has evinced that categorically since he took the job. And at a time when, at best, he probably has 35% of the German people behind him. So there's 60% plus of the German people who don't necessarily, and some are vehemently opposed to, agree with what he's doing. That's true with different percentages in every country. So if the leaders believe that what they're doing is not poisonous to their futures, is conducive to their futures being bright and rosy, which seems to be the way they comport themselves, then we've got a delusion going on that's huge. I said the other day, we're not in the concert of Europe anymore. We're in the concert of Cauchemar, a nightmare. They're falling apart, and it's basically because they have no leadership. But then who does in the West? Name me a single Western leader, with the possible exception of the new leader in Canada, who has a mind that seems to be basically fundamentally aligned with what the realities in the world are and what their power to deal with those realities is, and a strategy to match the two. They simply don't. We have the worst crop of leaders in the Western world in 100 years.
And the people react to that. I think you can see both the left and right throughout the West agreeing on one thing, that we're led by bums who should be thrown out. They agree with that. The left is concerned about plutocratic government and corruption in high levels. The right is not at all concerned about that. They're concerned about foreigners in our midst and woke values, which, are the opinion of a minority at best, and which, just like anti-woke values, really shouldn't be imposed on anybody. But you basically have populism as a reaction everywhere, either from the left or the right, and it's focused on disgruntlement of the populace. The governments are not delivering what they should deliver to the people, and they're not listening to the people. They do what they want regardless, or in response to special interests, and this is highly objectionable. I think one has to give the Trump administration credit, however. At least they're talking to the Russians. At least they're talking to Iran. At least they do appear once in a while to be willing to tell Mr. Netanyahu to hold his fire, whereas the Biden administration was not. So in the Biden administration, we had diplomacy as silence and posturing. In the Trump administration, we have one of two things: diplomacy as extortion, pay up or I'll shoot you or bomb you, and diplomacy as spin, something we do to keep people's attention away from the real issue. And I think this is pretty bad. NATO and NATO in the East, the fundamental problem with that is absolutely nobody out there wants that. They think we are more likely now to get them in trouble than to save them from trouble. Some of them, Taiwan, for example, could get us in trouble. I think the others are pretty cautious and confident. But the idea that somehow we're going to persuade them when we're behaving the way we are domestically and internationally to cement our hegemony in the region, our primacy, is a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. And the fact that people are dreaming about it and writing articles in the Foreign Affairs and so forth about it is an indication of how detached from reality we have become.
Carl, the other issue with the EU is the way that the Biden administration was somehow picturing Europe in the aftermath of joining of Sweden and Finland joining NATO, that right now NATO is bigger, better, stronger. And here is what Fitzo is talking about. And right now it seems that they're trying to take away his right of vetoing what's going on in Europe. Here is what he said about that.
Of a mandatory political opinion, the abolition of the veto, the punishment of the sovereign and the brave, the new Iron Curtain, the preference for war over peace. This is the end of the common European project. This is a departure from democracy. This is the precursor of a huge military conflict.
The concert has become a cauchemar.
Right.
I'm sorry. I think that's an apt phrase.
Well, I think.
Go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think in the Biden administration we papered over differences in the alliance that were there to be seen underneath the paper, but they're not papered over anymore. We have an open break with our principal European allies. They're not following our lead. They're doing their own thing. They basically said, they don't want Americans to lead them anymore. And we have said we want them to take responsibility, but we still propose to direct their policy. There's a certain contradiction there. I think they're completely wrong about Ukraine and Russia, and that they have to come to grips with the reality that the only way you can have peace in Ukraine is if you start with a peace in Europe. You talk about a broad agreement on security in Europe. Ukraine fits into that as a neutral nation. And then you talk about how you end the war in Ukraine, because you've established the preconditions for doing that. And you've ensured that the war, when it ends, will produce a better peace, which is what William Tecumseh Sherman said the purpose of war was. And I agree with him. Great American general. Not so great if you're from the South, I guess, but he had a way with words.
Carl.
Well, I was just, as Chaz was talking, I was just thinking about a conversation that General Powell and I had. Actually, he had just retired, was at America's Promise, but he asked me in a seminar at the Marine Corps War College, where I'd invited him down to be a speaker for my seminar. In the office, he asked me the question, where do you think a revived Russia will go? And I said, well, let me put my military hat on for a moment and let me say what I would do if I were Russia. My first objective would be to destroy NATO. My second objective would be to sever the transatlantic link. And my third objective would be to accomplish both of those without a nuclear exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, whoa, That's pretty raw. We hadn't quite got to Clinton and his expansion of NATO in the massive way that he began it, with the military-industrial complex determining his policy. But we were close, and we were already smelling Clinton wanting to do that. And he had already had fundamental deliberations with Clinton before he left about Bosnia and about why we shouldn't be in that mess. And, you know, he dissuaded H.W. Bush by saying 500,000 troops and 5 or 6 years in order to even do anything reasonably well, and you shouldn't do anything. And H.W. said, enough, enough, enough. I don't want to have anything to do with that. But Clinton was, you know, interested in establishing some bona fides as a war president. So I say all that, I go back to all that just to say that that's what's happened. In essence, I don't know if it was an accident. I don't know if Putin actually thought about this in a strategic way, the way somewhat like I just described, but it's happened. But we mostly did it to ourselves rather than Putin doing it to us. He's just taking advantage of our lack of strategy, or our strategic mistakes, if you want to be the least bit positive about describing it. But that's what's happening. Anybody with any brains and had worn a uniform as long as Powell and I had could see that NATO, having all these countries that couldn't pass the smell test, Albania and Montenegro were looking that way more than any other, but there are others too, or that countries that disavowed their years-long policy of neutrality because we engineered their governments through color revolutions in their own countries and got our people in there, people who didn't represent the majority of the Finns or the majority of the Norwegians or the majority of the Swedes. That was a new development. We didn't even see that coming. We knew it was a warning, but we didn't know it was coming to such successful fruition. But it did. And it has made NATO an absolutely untenable organization for any purpose, just as the EU has made itself an untenable organization for any democratic purpose. Now, if they want to have a autocracy and let van der Leyen run it, that's another thing altogether. But I dare say she'd disappear after 4 or 5 years under Putin's strategic effort to disapprove her presence. We've done it all to ourselves. I mean, yeah, there was some counterpoint, but we've done it all to ourselves.
About the same time, Larry, that Colin Powell asked you that question, I went to Beijing and I went to the Academy of Military Sciences, which at the time was functioning as J5 for the PLA, that is Strategy and Plans. And I asked them what their Russian policy was and what their estimates of Russian future behavior were. And there were 2 very bright colonels who then gave me a briefing. And it was very impressive. And they said, you know, we've had terrible problems with Russia over the course of our history. And Russia now is in a lot of trouble, and it's going down. This was 1995, but it'll be back. And we think it'll be back starting early in the 21st century. And when it comes back, we want it to be our friend, and we want it to be cooperative, and we don't want it to be a threat to us. And so our policy is all going to be bent to that objective. And they did that. And it was so much smarter than our approach to the great opportunity that the implosion of the Soviet Union and the return of the Russian Federation presented, that I find it shocking. It's absolutely shocking. And that the Europeans who, have a history which shows that you can't have peace and stability in Europe without the participation of Russia and Germany and others. Of course, we now have the Germans with a brigade, probably 4,800 men in Lithuania, isn't it, or Latvia? I don't remember which one. Lithuania, I believe. And this is a pretty historic development. And I don't know how many Germans agree with Chancellor Merz about that, but there they are with their large tank force and APCs and so forth, artillery. The world is changing, and we have helped to catalyze changes that arguably are not for the better.
Colonel, I talked with Paul Carrick Roberts. He believes that Putin the reason that Russia is not moving, is not that much aggressive in Ukraine, and they're somehow waiting for some sort of policy on the part of the United States. They want something bigger, like Yalta Agreement between the United States and Russia. But you've mentioned that Putin may had some sort of strategy, but did he need to have any sort of, because it's all about the West. He was waiting. He was telling us that he's waiting for some sort of agreement for more than 3 years of the conflict in Ukraine. And you see the name calling. We had the same sort of issue with the Biden administration. Right now, Donald Trump, we did two posts on his social truth. He said he called absolutely crazy a leader of the Russian president. He's not something ordinary guy on the street to call him. And he said that he's playing with fire. When the reporter asked him, did you know that Ukrainians attacked him by drones when he was going to the Kursk region? He said, no, I didn't know about that. Whose responsibility is to provide the president of the United States with such a major issue that he tweeted 2 times about it?
Oh, he's lying.
Yeah.
He's either lying or he's covering up or he doesn't know, and I don't know which one's worse. But that issue has been thoroughly vetted, I think, by the communities that would vet such a thing. And we have insisted on having no knowledge of it and having nothing to do with it. I find that hard to believe. I find it hard to believe that Mossad didn't have something to do with it. But back to your point, I think Putin is waiting to see if a Taurus missile or 2 or 3 or 4 is shot into Russia. That's the tactical thing right now, the operational tactical matter right now, because he said categorically, if it is, NATO's at war with Russia.
He said he will strike Berlin.
Yeah, and I'm waiting to see this because Merz may not know it, but I think Putin is deadly serious. And I think Merz is going to shoot a missile or 2 or 3, or Ukraine is with German auspices. But Putin's right. You can't do this without the United States. You can't do it without the capability to use the satellites and the information. And it's a NATO act. It's an overt NATO act. And when I was doing an interview with Moscow this morning, Ekaterina asked me the question. And I think we were getting to some fundamentals when she asked me this question. She said, why do you hate us so much? And then she expanded by saying, we were going through a translator, so it was a little bit slow, but she expanded and said, why did Biden and Blinken hate us so much? Why do the leaders in the West hate us so much? And, you know, my answer, and she then got to Trump, and my answer to her was, we just hate people whom we have defeated and who come back. And we just hate them. And I said, for Joe Biden and for Anthony Blinken, they hated you. They truly hated you. You asked the right question. They hated you. Your problem is dealing with that because there's still a lot of residual empire power, if you will, imperial power. And you've got to deal with that. You've got to deal with a certain set of leaders, and I suspect there's some in Europe too, that hate your guts. That's a hell of a thing to have to say, but I can't find any other real reason for doing it because there damn sure isn't a good strategic reason for doing it. But I can see this. You know, Dean Acheson once said that prestige is the shadow of power. Well, I would say it goes further than that when it's contaminated. It becomes a Blinken. It becomes a Biden. It becomes an absolute impediment to good relations. The relations of nations will never be sane and sound with that kind of ingredient playing a major role. And it's played a major role with us ever since Bill Clinton.
We're coming up, I think, to the end of our hour, and I just want to make one brief remark about the Taurus missile. Obviously, Mr. Merz misspoke. He's walked back his statement. about no restrictions on the use of weaponry by Ukraine. He claims this has been the long-standing policy, and that what he said about the towers was not an innovation, nothing new here to see, he said. But I think there's a more fundamental issue here. Europeans are not thinking about peace. They're thinking about how to continue this war.
Yep.
And a very good example of that is the German proposal to build a manufacturing industry for long-range weaponry in Ukraine. If there's one absolute condition that will have to be met for there to be peace, then that is that there will have to be limitations on long-range weaponry, both in Ukraine aimed at Russia and possibly in Russia aimed at Ukraine, and or deployments of some sort. We used to have a treaty on conventional forces in Europe which restricted deployments and particular weapon systems. That's all gone by the boards. But something like that's going to have to come back. And talking in this context about building a manufacturing capability that would directly counter that is absolutely not helpful at this stage.
I'm glad to hear the ambassador making that point. I had an argument with a gentleman the other day about why the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty was important, and as important, I said, as the INF Treaty. That's very recent. Very recent.
Yep.
Before wrapping up this session, Ambassador, do you feel that after all, with all we've said so far, do you think that Donald Trump is capable of making some sort of decision to find some sort of solution for what the administration, what the presidents of the United States are dealing with in terms of deep state? Is that going to be possible for Donald Trump to make some sort of moves that facilitate the upcoming president, the new president coming to power in the United States, to make some sort of room for them to work on?
Well, I'll just say that the chances would be considerably better if he surrounded himself with more able men and women than he has done. He has probably the least competent, least impressive cabinet and sub-cabinet that I've ever seen. And I think, I'm not sure, Larry, whether I've got you in age. I may, but I think we've both been around for quite a while. And we've seen sometimes, people in positions of power not only have feet of clay, they have heads of clay as well. And I think we're seeing that phenomenon now. So I'd say that the start of any repair job on the absence of American grand strategy and the consequences for the world is for us to get our act together, for us to repair the broken policy process. If Mr. Trump is told realistic, right things, there's probably a good chance he'll do them. If he continues to be told tendentious, incorrect things, or is left to imagine things and pursue his own delusional view of reality without a check on it, then I think the chances are poor.
Colonel.
Well, we got to get through the next 3.5 years, certainly, before we talk about any new leadership. But I must tell you that looking across the United States of America at the potential crop of leaders that are growing up now, as it were, I don't have a lot of hope. And I certainly don't have a lot of hope in the political process, which has degraded down to the process of who's got the most money and who's got the most benign character with regard to that money, and they're making it in hordes and hordes and piles. They don't want a president who's dynamic. They don't want a president who can lead. They don't want a president who can defy them. This is the so-called deep state, which I have a very different definition of than most people. And Trump is really not doing anything about it. I think one of the reasons Elon Musk is beating a fast retreat into the horizon is because he discovered that. And he wanted nothing more to do with it.
Yep. And Mr. Trump's problems in his first term, when all is said and done, were more with the people he appointed than they were with the permanent bureaucracy. He didn't really make an effort to enlist the bureaucracy as his troops in the various causes that he wanted to prosecute. But he appointed people like John Bolton and other people, I won't name, but quite a number of them, then wrote scandalous critiques of him after leaving office. They were neither loyal to him nor were they competent.
Thank you so much, Ambassador and Colonel Wilkerson. Great pleasure as always.
Thank you, Nima, for giving us the airtime.
Thank you indeed. Keep well.